and welcome to this episode of Kennedy Saves the World. As you have heard, Evan Gershkovich, along with two other Americans and an American green card holder, uh, they have all been released from Russian custody, which is great news, but it brings up a lot of questions about our foreign policy and whether or not making exchanges for prisoners with Russian assassins is the best way to deal with a very hostile Russian government. So the worry is obviously that if Americans, particularly American journalists, go over to Russia, there is great incentive to abduct them, hold them, put them in prison, have a sham trial, and then sentence them to years and years of hard labor, which is what happened to Evan and Paul Whelan, who is the U.S. Marine who was not released during the Brittany Griner prisoner swap. And when Evan Gershkovich, who is the reporter for the Wall Street Journal, who is the son of Russian immigrants, when he was sentenced, the big fear was that he was not going to be released, that there was going to be no deal other than a very complicated prisoner swap, which is what happened. And one of the people who was given back to Russia was a Russian assassin named Vadim Krasnikov. And yes, he was convicted in Germany of killing a Georgian asylee who had been sort of an anti-Russian protester. So they sent Krasikov to Germany, where he killed the Georgian asylee. And of course, his family and others in Germany who fought for justice, they're very upset. There's no perfect way to do these things. But, of course, President Trump is going to say, well, when I take office, Putin is never going to screw around like this again. And Joe Biden, during his press conference today, where he looked very, very frail, even more so than he has over the last few weeks, saying happy birthday to a 13-year-old who didn't want to be on camera and who burst into tears afterward because she was so mortified when the president was like, don't date until you're 30. No serious guys until you're 30, which was a very odd thing to do on a day like this when it was really about Evan and the other prisoners celebrating their release, their freedom, and reuniting them with their families. And it would have been a good opportunity for the president to say, do not abduct Americans wherever you are because we will kick you in the hiney hole. He didn't say that. And that's a very important thing. So I got into it today on the Outnumbered Couch with Ari Fleischer, who worked for George W. Bush in his administration. He was press secretary. He's a very smart guy. And he and I may have different foreign policy views. But Ari was saying, I think we all agree that there should be a stronger message from America. If you take them, we will find you. We will make life very, very difficult for you. There is no reason to take Americans, particularly American reporters. And the Constitution that we have here, we have it for a reason, and it is very sacred. And we will defend our reporters' First Amendment rights, not only to report in this country, but report to this country. We don't assume that they are protected under the laws of the various dangerous places where they are reporting, but we were operating under the assumption that the Russian government wasn't going to do that, since Evan Gershkovich was the first reporter abducted and used as essentially a hostage. You could say he was just a wrongful detainee since the Cold War. That's a very, very long time. In fact, if you bring the Cold War up to Gen Zers, they think that you're talking about setting the thermostat too low. They don't even know what communism is. They've just been told by AOC that it's really great. And communism means that you can go to college for free and you can bone anyone you want with zero consequences.
Don't go anywhere. More Kennedy Saves the World right after this.
So that is a long time. We're talking since the Reagan era that we have not seen a U.S. journalist taken and thrown into a hard labor prison camp. So luckily, Evan is free. His colleagues at the Wall Street Journal have been working tirelessly behind the scenes, trying to keep Evan's name out there. Same with his family, same with Paul Whelan's family and the others. And there are a lot of people who are learning their names for the very first time today. And still, there are more who are being held captive in Russia and other places, in Turkey, in Gaza. And we need to be tough and smart and disincentivize people from taking Americans hostage. So Ari Fleischer's answer is shut everything down. Don't let any Americans go to Russia. There's no reason to go there. And President Biden just today said, don't go. And my feeling is that's not what journalism is. Journalism, especially when you are a war correspondent or a foreign correspondent operating in places where the sources you gather might be hostile to an authoritarian regime. Yes, you are putting yourself at some risk, but that's why it takes nards of steel to do that job, because it is so critically important that we do hear those stories. And so Ari Fleischer said, let the Germans tell them. Well, if we trusted the Germans, we wouldn't have given $100 billion to Ukraine right now, and we wouldn't be talking about sending them F-16 fighter jets. You can't necessarily trust every other country to do the work that is implicit and necessary for American reporting that is, done by Americans for Americans, because we have a different view of the world, we have a different view of freedom, and we demand more in terms of content and the truth. So I disagree with that completely. And I do know people who have gone overseas and reported from places. And, I also, and I said this on Outnumbered today, I read Benjamin Hall's book, and it wasn't just about his time in Ukraine and the heroic effort it took to get him out of the country alive, which almost didn't happen. And the former special operators who do that kind of work, because they are working without weapons. They are very crafty private diplomats who go and secure Americans and get them out of places like Afghanistan and Ukraine and, hopefully occasionally Russia. So, yes, journalists still have to do their job. Americans still have to be protected. Regimes like Vladimir Putin have to know that when an American steps foot into Russia, they are not a glistening piece of raw meat that should be devoured by former KGB operatives who just want to get in good with the oligarchs and use these American targets as bargaining chips. And that is the climate that has been established with Russia in particular. So, Vice President Harris and former President Trump really, really have to be pushed on this. What specifically, would you do differently in terms of our foreign policy with Russia? And what would you do to secure the remaining Americans there? Because, you don't have a lot of options. It's like giving them cash and assassins really doesn't do much to disincentivize, and just blowing the living crap out of them also creates a little bit more of a tense environment. I think the answer is more nuanced, and both those people absolutely have to have an answer. I haven't heard a satisfactory one yet. Whatever we're doing, so far we are doing it wrong. I can only save the world. I can't run it. This has been Kennedy Saves the World. I'm Kennedy.
Listen ad-free with a Fox News Podcast Plus subscription on Apple Podcasts, and Amazon Prime members can listen to this show ad-free on the Amazon Music app. Oh, go ahead and leave me a review while you're there. I'd love to hear what you have to say. You've been listening to Kennedy Saves the World on the Fox News Podcast Network.